listening to Fighting Game Follies.
It's the #1 podcast for low-level player opinions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Round 1.
Hello to all my mashers, grapplers, set plays, psychopaths, Wi-Fi warriors, O2ers, tournament organizers, developers, content creators, and everyone in the such and spectrum in the FGC. Every time I do that intro, it somehow gets longer. What's going on? It's your boy Groofer Games, the Skyward Games.png, whatever I'm going by in this tournament run, and today we have another episode of the Fighting Game Follies. Episode 15, either 15 or 16, I don't remember. Spotify's like naming or numbering thing is weird. But what's happening? What's going on? We got a tiny bit to talk about here because someone piqued my interest in terms of what's currently happening in the FGC. So I guess like sit back, relax, and like kick your feet up, do whatever you're doing, whatever homework you're driving, whatever you got going on. Don't worry about it. I will just soothe your soul with my very dumb ramblings for however long this is gonna take about whatever topic I decide to talk about, which I'm gonna really quickly give some backstory on before I actually get into it and like get into the meat and potatoes. So I was scrolling Twitter, right? Like, as the loser I am, I'm scrolling Twitter and I see some tweet about like something FGC like anime related, and it's a particular tweet because it's essentially asking for a more anime style Street Fighter game. So what that basically like that means is like a street or a anime style title that is like I guess more anime influenced or something. I couldn't really figure it out. But then that's initially what had me thinking because when that question got posed, I saw a lot of people like giving their opinions on what an anime style Street Fighter game would be or like what I guess close comparisons that they could even come to that. And there are a lot of like I guess like answers to the questions and a lot of people that like there are some that could be excuse me, there are some that could have been agreed on and then others that weren't. So this actually got me thinking, and I even asked around a tiny bit in the like FGC on like my side of things, and I asked what some people's opinions were on like the topic itself. And this is where we eventually find ourselves here on today's episode of the Fighting Game Follies, asking what exactly constitutes a anime fighter and where does the spectrum actually lie from a game being anime to a game being Street Fighter, and what games actually lie in the middle of that, and what's the best thing that you can play in order to get as much of a Street Fighter feel as you can out of your anime games. So that's what I'm here to talk about. But before we actually talk about that, I suggest we actually start talking about what even constitutes a Street Fighter game being a Street Fighter game, which obviously, as the name implies, it's a Street Fighter title. But we can delve a tiny bit more into this as I feel like just going off of my criteria for what a Street Fighter style game is a couple of things. First off, it doesn't necessarily have to be a Street Fighter title because there is going to be something here that's more anime based that actually is a Street Fighter title. But when people say Street Fighter, this is just me, but I'm thinking things like Street Fighter 2, 5, and 3. Specifically games that focus a lot more on the neutral ground in the game and don't have any like insane super long combos or anything that are normally associated with the anime genre. I'm mainly focusing on like a couple constants, like there's going to be a charge character and a like input based character who's going to have like the same tool set, but it still be different in the sense of like how it's actually used. You're obviously going to have your staple archetypes like your grapplers, zoners, anything in the such. It's going to be a lot more of a, I want to say, slower paced game in terms of like the overall decisions and everything that's going to be done. And on top of that as well, I'm also like saying that or like I said earlier, there isn't going to be like a huge air-to-air game that's really happening. Like the most that you're going to get in terms of like an air-to-air is probably like DP like snuffing out somebody's jump or something. Either way, the fact of the matter is the fact that the game is a lot more focused on the ground and it's way more neutral based. For all of my FPS, like, or to actually give an FPS like equivalent, I would say like Modern Warfare 2 or the older COD games. But that's essentially what I'm going by to constitute what counts as a Street Fighter title. So, for the purposes of this, When I say Street Fighter, I'm going to be talking, or I'm mainly going to be pulling reference from Street Fighter 5, Street Fighter 3, Street Fighter 2, as those are the ones that like sort of give off that golden age era of what a Street Fighter game actually is. And then there are some people that were like, or like just going back to the tweet again, there were some people that were throwing out like sort of joke-ish picks, but I still do want to like partly talk about how like Tekken is, I guess, the Street Fighter or like the 3D equivalent of a Street Fighter game, which I guess is fair. But another game that should actually be talked about here is, I guess, the KOF series because KOF, weirdly, or not even weirdly enough, but KOF is a lot more of like the ground focus based thing that you can like sort of find in Street Fighter S titles. And when it comes to like, Street Fighter S titles, those are sort of the ones that I'm getting at when it comes to specifically like fighting games itself. I guess if you want to like broaden out the spectrum a lot more because this is just me, but I don't like really I'm in a weird boat where I don't necessarily constitute like Injustice as a fighting game, despite it very much being a fighting game. But that's a topic for another day and like my own semantics. But things like Mortal Kombat, like I've been saying earlier, Street Fighter, Injustice, and Tekken, just and KOF as well, games that just overall have a lot more of a slower and more methodical thought process when it comes to just anything about the game, when it comes to its balance, when it comes to it actually being played, just anything about it. It's going to be a lot more slower. You're going to have like a lot more of like thought put into it. And I'm not like trying to knock off like anime fighters and say that there isn't any thought put into it, but I mean in terms of like the amount of actual interactions that need to be won or anything, or like just the amount of interactions that you do have with your opponent, they're going to be a lot more like sizable in numbers when you look at your anime brother in comparisons, which I feel like is also another thing that actually constitutes what separates an anime fighter from being a Street Fighter game. Just overall the amount of actual times that you get to play the game and interact with your opponent, as anime fighters are sort of notorious for having super long drawn out combos that do about like half your health bar, and then like you just don't really get to play the game. But I mean, then again, the thing that offsets this is the fact that like either side is really able to do anything like this. So it's sort of like more of a high risk, higher reward style of situation. In terms of mechanics and everything else, they're probably not going to be all too like wacky and insane. There most likely isn't going to be an air block. There probably isn't going to be any air dashes unless it's a very character specific thing. In terms of like other super meters or other like garbage that you might have, you're probably only really going to like stick with your base super meter that every character has access to, maybe 1 or 2 meters for like a character specific thing, but nothing like your X factors or ultras or anything insane that's like going to really turn the tide to it. Although we have been seeing that sort of be changed in terms of like the modern day era, as games like Street Fighter 5 had its V system, and then Street Fighter 6 obviously it has its like little system, which I don't even know what to call. I think, or no, it's like drives. It's drive mechanic. I don't know why that like I forgot about that. But yeah, Street Fighter 5 has like the V system. Street Fighter 6 has the drive mechanic, and but yeah, in terms of that, it's not really going to have any like insane like super big like things that really constitute it to be anything different. It's gonna be like a normal experience. When like someone outside of the FGC thinks of a fighting game, this is what they're thinking of. Like unless they're like sort of influenced by like anime or anything else, which then they might be like, oh, then like X, Y, and Z and whatever else, which we will actually be talking about now.
Round two.
So now that we're looking at the other spectrum, the like complete opposite side of the bar, let's talk a tiny bit about the anime fighters and like what they essentially bring to the table and what to really expect from it. And from how I was talking about all of the like Street Fighter S games, which I should call something outside of like Street Fighter, but I don't really know what else to coin it as. So I'm just going to call it like I guess I could say like more traditional stuff. And even then, the traditional stuff sort of goes out of the like scope of traditional like norms every now and again. So I don't really want to like blanket term it under that. Yeah, forget everything I was just talking about. Let's just continue calling it Street Fighter games. But in the like guise of like all of the Street Fighter stuff, basically anything that they don't have, like the anime community is probably going to like most likely have. You want an air block? Boom, air block. You want a like aerial game that's like insane and like completely nutty and you can barely follow? Boom, you have like an aerial like game that is completely nutty and you can barely follow. You want to like do something crazy or like kill your opponent within like two hits? That's wild. That's insane. That's completely it's completely fine, normal, and sometimes even like that's the main point of the game. Like that's it. That's the goal. That's the deal. That's the biz nasty. I don't really know what other way to put it. They have super long like combos that can do insane damage, bars that you don't under bars, system mechanics and everything else on top of other bars and system mechanics that you don't understand and what's going on, and then characters that have like very stupid names, stupid sounding like move names or like just like stupid looking designs or anything that are like so over the top and like influenced from like any anime that it's actually kind of insane. And obviously, the grandfather of this style, I should say, is Arc System Works. But there are a couple others that are playing around this field as well. But like if you want an anime fighter, go look at the ArcSys catalog. They're gonna have you. They're really going to have you solid in terms of like what you're looking for. But just to name off a couple examples, Blaze Blue, or I guess Blaz Blue, since technically it doesn't have an E, but what, I'm an American, so I'm going to continue calling it Blaze Blue. Blaze Blue, Guilty Gear, Persona 4 Arena Ultimax. Some tried true, I would say staples, but Arena Ultimax is like sort of struggling right now, so I'm not gonna say staples. But some tried and true staples, things that are not going to let you down, especially Gear and I would say Blaze Blue, but like that game's future is very rocky, or in terms of like getting another fighting game. But though those are probably the two that like really constitute the hard anime style in terms of like everything that I was talking about. Like they have the super crazy characters, the super crazy combos, like the super crazy like literally anything that you like. If you can imagine it, then I guarantee you, then it's there. And then I guess here I can also put like a couple of like little smaller indie titles as well. Like for example, Yomi Hustle, aka Your Only Move is Hustle, because I do actually sort of want to constitute that as being an anime fighter, since that does have like all of the stuff that I was talking about, but I guess to a I don't want to necessarily say lesser extent, but it's at not as high of an extent that I was like talking about in terms of like the street fighting games and everything. So there's that. In terms of anything else, that's sort of like all that really is to it when it comes to like anime games. They have like very stupid, or I don't want to say stupid, but they have like very insane and wild, just straight everything about them is just insane. Things that like don't things that are that are supposed to make sense, they don't make sense. Things that do make sense, they don't make sense. Like sometimes like the norm is flipped, but that's the whole idea. That's the whole goal, to flip the norm. It's supposed to be used more as an experimental field to see what can and can't be done with the genre and how it can necessarily be like innovated on. And honestly, we do sort of need more games like that, because if you don't have something that innovates on the title, then you're just going to get more Street Fighter 1s. And then Street Fighter 1 was not a good game. Well, in terms of what it was trying to do, but like it was not a good game. It's not We're not going to talk about it. We're just going to leave off of the fact that Street Fighter 1 bad, and then that's it. That's really all I can like say about anime fighters, especially since I've been playing them for like so long that I can't really figure out any other way to like talk about it outside of just like the base point. Things can get nutty very quickly, and you have to be ready for the fact that it's going to get nutty incredibly quickly. And that's partly the charm to it, honestly. Like it's supposed to get wild. It's supposed to be crazy. You're supposed to like wake up and not know where you were like 4 hours ago. You're not supposed to be able to comprehend anything. You're not supposed to be able to like understand like really what's happening. But that's the charm to it. That's sort of the bits and pieces that you have fun with. That's just what you come in store to. You go to GameStop or whatever you buy games, you go on to Steam, you're like, oh, hey, look at this. This looks like something out of Naruto. I know I'm not gonna understand anything. And then it's like, boom, you don't understand anything. And it's like, yeah, I can't really be mad because I should have expected something like this. But that's sort of all I can really say. I'm just like rambling on, I guess, more about like them. But that's really all I can say about anime fighters. They're just that wacky, weird, like distant cousin that you know, and then it's like you know that he's cool, but at the same time you don't want to like really associate with him because you don't know what his entire deal is. You just know that he's like a solid guy. If you want something if you want an interesting story or like something cool that you like probably weren't going to really interact with like otherwise, then like you can go to him, talk to him, and then he will most definitely have something for you. But let's say that like weirdo cousin who you don't necessarily talk to decided to straighten out his life and go get a 9 to 5 job. What comes of that? And then how does that actually change like his demeanor and everything? What changes about him? And if we're deciding to take this analogy like another step further, then this is actually where we sort of get our I guess like middle monkey men of like the spectrum of where the anime fighters and the street fighter like players can sort of converge and then be like, okay, we have bits and pieces of our games all into it, and then we can. This is probably as close as we're going to get outside of like double dipping into other series. And this is just where the big can of worms of things from that one tweet earlier sort of pops up.
Round 3.
So now that we actually get what constitutes into, what happens when you mix my peanut butter and my chocolate and your peanut butter, right? Whatever happens for the anime and the Street Fighter communities, let's actually talk about what constitutes like when they actually mix and then what actually happens. And then just really quickly also to like clarify a tiny bit because there are a couple of games that I wanted to like say that like sort of constitute into one genre and then one that like sort of fits into another, and then there are some like just overall series that there are some titles that it fit into one and then others that fit into another, which I guess I'll like sort of clean up here now. And just once again, like all of these are just my opinion. Like if you don't agree with them, then like come at me on my socials and then we can talk about it there or like just like wherever. I don't really care. Like I found this to be a really interesting conversation that when I was talking about it with other people, like just overall what to them constitutes a game being as an anime fighter as opposed to like a Street Fighter game, and then what they actually think, fits into that criteria of what they mentioned. And I even threw in a couple of curveballs that like had some people stumped as to where to actually place it. So yeah, I found this conversation to be a lot of fun. Honestly, I might even like come back to it on like a special episode and then like have a few guests come and give their like opinions and thoughts on it. Who knows? You should like maybe stick around and find out and then see if I actually do that. I probably will. Just a matter of like time to tell when. But let's actually get into the meat and potatoes of like what actually happens when you do mix my Street Fighter with your anime and your anime into my Street Fighter. And then we get a sort of mixed bag here of like just whatever. And a lot of people were saying a lot of different things as to what actually happens when you do mix them and then what games do come from them. So I'm just going to like read off a couple from here and then also give off my opinion as to what I think constitutes them as, being anime fighter, like an anime Street Fighter game, a street. I don't know. I don't know how what funny like thing I could call it to like mix it. An asp? I don't know. I don't whatever. But first off, we got something that like might be a tiny bit weird here, seeing it on the list in terms of like what makes it a mix. But Street Fighter Alpha 2, Alpha 2, and just the entire Alpha series in general is very anime-esque in terms of its weird like custom combo system that you're able to do and like everything of the sort. I don't play a lot of Alpha 2. I'm just sort of going off of what's on the list here, but a lot of people were citing Alpha 2 to be a very like anime Street Fighter-esque game, which makes sense because you're sort of just still working off the baseline idea of a Street Fighter game and then just like adding a bit more, I guess, anime components to it. What those anime components actually are beats me, but for the general consensus, the Alpha series like sort of fits their bill for an anime Street Fighter. Next up, this is going to be a very weird take, but I think Street Fighter 6 is sort of constituting as a mix, not because and it's sort of also in that like same boat as Alpha because it's not necessarily adding anything different in terms of to the Street Fighter, traditional formula. It's just the fact that there's now a new like element in it which is very reminiscent of other anime fighting games, with that being the drive mechanic, which is essentially it's like the same mechanic that like two players are going to be able to like pull from universally. And despite it, not being like a shared mechanic, like there isn't one drive bar that like both of the carry or players have access to, it is still something that's very reminiscent of a more, I guess, traditional style anime fighter, with that being Eunice. I love Eunice. I love Under Night in Birth. Like Eunice is just such a cool game, and I'm dude. I just need either like another title update or like I'll take rollback, bro. But like, please, this game cannot die. Like, Eunice got me through a very big part of the. I'm gonna rant here, but like Eunice got me like it was that, and then BB tag that got me through the pandemic, and I really hold that game is sick. If you haven't played Eunice, play Eunice, bro. It's in delay hell, but like, bro, Eunice is gas. Eunice is so good, dude. But yeah, Eunice is sort of more in the weirder like anime scope and the fact that it has like it's not necessarily a drive mechanic, more so it's like the grid and Vorpal system, which is what makes it more anime, but it is still a lot more of a like footsies based thing that like when you actually get into it, it is a lot more traditional in like a couple of aspects. So I'm gonna put it here. I'm putting it here. Um, Korihime. I've never heard of this game. A lot of people were citing it as being like more like mixing it more in with the anime portions than the Street Fighter, but whatever. I didn't even want to do research on this. Just off of that name alone, I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds very anime, but I'm just gonna trust the people here on this one. Grand Blue Fantasy Versus. This is also another title that like I also saw a lot of people talking about as well when it came to it being a more like anime style Street Fighter game, which like honestly I can kind of see it. This game was like not necessarily paraded per se, but like a lot of it or it's very fundamentals based. Like let's say that. Like it very much is fundamental based and it has the machinations of a Street Fighter game. And I honestly feel like if we were to put all of like the games that I listed in terms of like an anime Street Fighter like alignment chart, this would most likely be or actually no, not even likely. This would probably be the true neutral of the entire thing. It's as Street Fighter and anime that you can most possibly like get, which is like that's kind of it's weird seeing that like we have this like neutral ground that everyone can get into, especially since like that game did a number of things in order to try and like attract new people. Like for example, the simple input system. Like I thought that was really going to be something that really brings like a lot of newcomers in, and it brought in a decent amount of people, but it had a lot of competition to like fight with. So like that was sort of its downfall. But overall, just the fact that this game is like such a true neutral in terms of like the anime and Street Fighter like community, and I thought that would have been like talked about and not necessarily celebrated, but like that would have been lot more of a driving factor for it. And then obviously I know it's like because it's not like a six button like any normal like Street Fighter game is or anything of the sort, but it is as neutral of a ground as you can get for any Street Fighter or anime game. But yeah, that's sort of what my or that's sort of what that's being constituted as. DNF Duel, also another very similar game in the like scope of Grand Blue Fantasy versus being a lot more of well, I don't want to say it's like similar because that game right now is like oof boy. It is still it's getting updated and everything, but like that's more anime than like Street Fighter, which is kind of like weird. But then again, a lot of people are citing it to be a lot more of, or like still in that same like vein, and I partly don't see it. Mostly, I see it being way more as a anime game than a Street Fighter game. But sure, whatever. I was going to put initially I was going to put Strive, like Guilty Gear Strive, as being a more Street Fighter game rather than a anime style game, since comparative to other games like for example Xrd and like the XX series and everything else that came before it, it is a lot more on the ground and like boots heavy. It's way more of like that modern warfare 2 rather than like its COD 3 predecessors. So I guess since I am citing it to be more of like a on the roots and traditional style fighter, it would make sense to put it more in the like mixed category. And also, whilst we're here, like just putting anything in the mixed category, and like I know I probably forgot to like say this, but like I'm also not like putting platform fighters into this because that is a completely different ballpark of its own that like I really don't even want to talk about. But another title, or I guess like another like sort of genre of games that I should talk about here is like tag fighters. Well, tag fighters and gag fighters. Gag fighters more in the sense of like things like um what is it? Dive kick. Dive kick is very weird. Like I really don't know what to constitute dive kick as because it's style. There's nothing about it like stylistic wise, like gameplay wise, or anything of the sort is anime based, but at the same time, it's so in a realm of its own that you can't even put it into being like a traditional fighter either. And I don't just want to like grandfather it in as being a traditional fighter because then I feel like that's sort of disingenuous to it as a whole. But I digress. Dive kick is weird. We're just gonna put it in the mix because I don't know where else to put it, and I don't want to put it in like a other category. And then tag fighters as well. Tag fighters are like such a bad. Tag fighters are a mixed bag in and of itself, and by tag fighters I mean things like the main two things that I'm citing here in terms of like the tag fighter argument is Skullgirls and Marvel vs. Capcom. Though those two series like when I was like talking about this with other people and like listing off the criteria, that was my main curveball. I'd always be like, okay, cool. If you think a anime fighter is a lot more like fast paced and everything, what's your opinion on Marvel? And then instantly it would like that's what would normally take the conversation to like new heights. It's Marvel and Skullgirls. Especially since like you can't really put them it's weird because like Marvel, there's nothing anime about Marvel. There's nothing anime about Marvel at all. But like you look at Skullgirls, you look at its animation style, the fact that it's all like hand drawn and everything, and like that was one of its main selling points. And then you're like, oh well, that's obviously going in anime. But if I'm not gonna put Marvel into like the anime category, and that's like that pulls a lot of inspiration from it, then you gotta something's not clicking. But yeah, those are basically all of the games that I want to essentially talk about in terms of like the mixed bag of like what happens when you mix the anime and like Street Fighter like spectrums together. And like I said earlier, I probably am going to talk about this like later on, probably when this series is like I don't want to say like oh a year old or something because I feel like that's way too far into the future and like that's probably when the conversation is going to die down, but you probably won't see this topic for like a little like while longer, or at least not coming from me. Maybe when we get more like AAA titles, maybe when Street Fighter 6 is actually under the belt for a tiny bit, maybe when we get more news on Tekken 8 that isn't just character reveals and like we actually get like maybe something that isn't like a closed beta that like only a couple people got to play or something, then like I'll talk about that or I'll open this up and then like talk about that some more. But I don't know. Let me know what you think though on what actually constitutes an anime fighter from being an anime fighter and then what constitutes a street fighter as being a street fighter because I really do want to know. This like the entire week that I was like talking about this with other people and then researching, I was like, this whole like episode, how I was going to move forward with it, and then just like the question itself, it had me for a while. And I really did enjoy like talking about it with other people, researching it, figuring out what I was going to say, and just like actually recording it and sitting down and like talking about it to you guys now and opening up the conversation even more. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. You already know where to find me. Find me on the socials. You can see it in the like description below for the Spotify thing as well. Um that's really all I have to say. Like thank you all so much for listening into today's episode for the Fighting Game Follies. I really do appreciate it and I really do love you for sitting down and listening to this like goober guy like ramble on for however long I rambled on for this time around. It really does mean a lot to me, and I really do appreciate it. Next week, we're probably going to. This is most likely going to be the week that I go over all of the Tekken 8 stuff again because we got a lot of Tekken 8 stuff that dropped as of recent. A lot more character reveals and everything, and we're probably going to get more by the time I actually go out and record the episode. So yeah, stay on the lookout for that. A lot of the Tekken 8 stuff. I'm slowly starting to learn it. I'm like I'm way too late into it now, but like I'm slowly starting to learn like the lore of Tekken and then like from the lore onwards is where I'll like actually start getting my grips into it. And speaking about things that are like slowly coming out soon, Delilah for Guilty Gear Strive and like or actually, yeah, Delilah and then Black Dahlia, both for Street Fighter, or whoa, Guilty Gear Strive and Skullgirls. Um, Played a tiny bit of Black Dahlia so far. Like, I think she's really interesting. I'm probably going to like. I'm not really that much of a fan of like six buttons, but like I don't know what it is. It's just that like Black Dahlia was sort of like what got me back into Skullgirls, I guess. I'm sort of like trying to mess around with her a tiny bit more and see if I'm going to like really stick with the game. But I guess we'll just have to see. And then Delilah. Delilah's weird. I don't know if I said it already, but I'm not gonna be playing her. She's like way too weird, or at least like way too weird for my taste. So yeah, there's also other stuff going on as well, but I feel like I've been talking to, or I've been like sort of talking your guys' ears off for a tiny bit wired, a tiny like too long. So I'll let you guys like all go. Once again, thank you all so much for allowing me to like sit here and chew your ear off and then talk about something that is probably going to be inconsequential for like the next couple of years because there's going to be a game that just miraculously comes in sort of like versus and then just like meld the entire community together into a giant just like FGC conglomerate. But oh well, until that day happens, thank you guys so much. It's been your boy Groove for Games. I love you all. Please keep safe, keep doing your thing, keep doing your things out there, and I'll see you all in the next one. Appreciate it. Stay safe. Love you guys. And I'm out.